Today, we uncover the worst Grand Canyon deaths ever. From a camper who carelessly placed his sleeping pad on the ground without checking what was hiding underneath, to a college student who threw a stone at the wrong target and triggered something that would send her over the edge. It was April 22, 2017. The South Kaibab Trail wound through an exposed section where an informal rock outcrop jutted out from the main path, offering dramatic views of the inner canyon. The afternoon sun had warmed the limestone surfaces, while shaded crevices beneath overhangs provided shelter for desert wildlife. The outcrop was narrow, with a steep drop of approximately 60 to 70 feet on one side, and loose gravel scattered over smooth rock surfaces. Visibility was excellent, but the terrain was treacherous for anyone who ventured too close to the edge. Evan Rook, 26 years old, worked in animal care and had developed a reputation as an exotic wildlife enthusiast. He spent his free time handling reptiles and arthropods, often attempting close interactions that others would avoid. His colleagues knew him as someone who believed his experience made him immune to the dangers that affected ordinary people. Adam Clint, his longtime friend, had accompanied him on this canyon visit and was familiar with Evan's tendency to approach dangerous animals. Evan carried a small phone camera and was known for recording close-up footage of wildlife encounters, regardless of the risks involved. He had posted similar videos online before, showing himself handling various venomous creatures. The two had stopped at the narrow rock outcrop when they spotted a bark scorpion partially concealed inside a shaded rock crevice near the edge. The rock surface sloped outward toward the steep drop, and the positioning made any approach inherently dangerous. The scorpion was approximately 3 inches long and displayed the characteristic pale coloration of the species. Adam immediately warned Evan to step back and leave the creature alone, recognizing both the venomous nature of the scorpion and the precarious location. The warnings were ignored, as they often were when Evan encountered interesting wildlife. Evan crouched down and extended his right hand toward the crevice, attempting to control the scorpion by the tail as it darted along the rock surface, a maneuver he had performed with other species in controlled environments. This was consistent with his usual approach to handling arthropods, though bark scorpions are particularly quick and defensive when threatened. The scorpion moved suddenly along the rock surface, likely responding to the perceived threat of Evan's approaching hand. Its movement was rapid and unpredictable, typical behavior for the species when cornered. To follow the scorpion's movement, Evan shifted his weight forward. His positioning was already unstable due to the sloped rock surface and his crouched posture. When he leaned further forward, his boot lost traction on the loose gravel that had accumulated over the smooth limestone. The combination of forward momentum and unstable footing caused him to lose his balance completely. He pitched headfirst over the edge of the outcrop. He fell from the outcrop to the canyon slopes below. Later examination indicated that he struck at least one rocky ledge during the fall. Evidence at the scene suggested that the fall continued until he came to rest at a talus-covered ledge system below the outcrop. Medical findings later documented fatal head and upper spinal injuries. He was later confirmed deceased at the scene. Adam witnessed Evan lose his footing and fall over the edge, then immediately alerted park rangers using his cell phone. Rangers responded to the scene and confirmed death at the talus-covered ledge system. They documented the circumstances and recovered Evan's phone camera. The final recoverable clip showed his hand reaching toward the scorpion just before the device stopped recording. The scorpion was later observed retreating into a nearby rock crevice, and no further wildlife hazard was identified. The immediate area was temporarily restricted to allow for investigation and body recovery, then reopened the same day after the site was cleared. The official cause of death was listed as a fatal fall following loss of footing while attempting to handle wildlife. The investigation determined that the incident was preventable and resulted from ignoring established safety protocols regarding wildlife interaction. No equipment failure or structural issues contributed to the accident. It was June 14, 2016. High-volume summer dam releases pushed fast, cold water through Hance Rapid. High flow exposed a mid-channel diabase boulder that split the current into violent lateral waves, making the rapid especially dangerous that season. Leora Jant, 29 years old, worked as an outdoor education instructor back home. She had spent years teaching river safety and wilderness skills to students, and she was a strong swimmer with solid technical knowledge. This was her first trip through the Grand Canyon, though, and despite her experience on other rivers, she had limited exposure to canyon-specific whitewater. She had chosen the front left paddle position on the raft, a spot that required quick reactions and constant communication with the guide. The group was running behind schedule. They had lost time at a previous campsite due to equipment issues, and the pressure to make up distance was evident. When they reached Hance Rapid, the guide assessed the line but decided against portaging. The water was high, but it looked manageable. Leora adjusted her helmet and checked her flotation device, though it sat looser than it should have. She had tightened it earlier but had loosened the straps during a break, and never refastened them properly. The raft entered the rapid slightly off the intended line. The current grabbed the left side and pulled it toward the exposed boulder. The guide shouted commands, and the paddlers dug in hard, but the angle was already wrong. A diagonal wave rose up and slammed into the left tube where Leora sat. The impact was immediate and violent. The raft flipped. Leora was ejected headfirst into the main current. The cold water hit her like a wall, and the noise of the rapid drowned out everything else. She was carried a short distance downstream before being driven into a fixed diabase boulder near the main current. Her left side struck the rock with full force. Her helmet absorbed some of the impact, but not enough. The impact was severe. Later examination would show extensive head trauma and fatal cervical spine injuries. Witnesses later said she did not surface actively or attempt to swim after the impact. For a brief moment, turbulent water held her against the rock before the current shifted and carried her into a slower eddy downstream. Other members of the group surfaced and scrambled to right the raft. One of them spotted her floating face down in the eddy and swam over immediately. They pulled her onto the riverbank within minutes. Her helmet was still strapped on, the foam liner compressed on the left side. CPR was started right away, with compressions and rescue breaths administered in rotation. There was no response. They found her unresponsive with no signs of effective breathing or circulation. They continued efforts for nearly 20 minutes before stopping. The guide used a satellite communicator to alert park authorities. Due to weather conditions and operational constraints within the canyon, an immediate helicopter recovery was not possible, so the group secured her body and continued downriver to the next accessible point. Rangers met them there several hours later and confirmed the death. The official report listed the cause as blunt force head trauma with cervical spine injury. The raft was inspected and found to be in proper condition. The guide's actions were reviewed as part of the incident assessment, and no policy violations were cited. The trip was terminated, and all participants were transported out of the canyon. Leora's equipment was collected and logged. After the investigation was completed, the incident was documented as a river-running fatality, and the rapid remained open under standard operating conditions. It was August 11, 2016. The North Kaibab Trail descended through the lower switchbacks in brutal afternoon heat. The temperature had climbed past 100 degrees, and the exposed rock faces radiated waves of shimmering air. The trail cut back and forth across steep terrain, with little shade and no water sources for miles. Most hikers had started early or waited for evening, but a few stragglers still moved along the dusty path under the punishing sun. Ruddock Fife, 52 years old, worked in warehouse supervision and had a reputation for dismissing safety warnings. He was hiking alone during the peak heat of the day, carrying a wooden walking stick and wearing minimal sun protection. He had been managing hypertension for years, and his cardiologist had warned him about strenuous activity in extreme heat. He had brought only one water bottle, which was already empty. A Grand Canyon pink rattlesnake had coiled beside the trail in a patch of shade cast by a small boulder. The snake was approximately 5 feet long and had been there for some time, occasionally rattling when other hikers passed. Several groups had already encountered it that afternoon, and each had given it a wide berth. When Ruddock reached the spot, he stopped within 6 to 7 feet of the snake. Other hikers coming up behind him pointed out the danger and suggested going around, but he showed no concern. Instead, he began tapping the ground near the snake with his walking stick. The tapping was rhythmic and deliberate, and it caused the snake to coil more defensively. Its rattle became constant. Rather than backing away, Ruddock stepped closer. The distance between him and the snake decreased to roughly 3 feet. He lowered his stick toward the snake's position, continuing to tap the ground around it. The strike came without additional warning. The snake lunged forward and made contact with the back of his right hand. The fangs penetrated the tissue, and venom was injected. Ruddock pulled his hand back and examined the puncture wounds, which began bleeding. Swelling started within minutes. Instead of sitting down and remaining calm, he continued hiking. He was already dehydrated and had been pushing himself hard in the extreme heat for hours. His right hand and forearm began swelling, and the pain intensified, but he kept moving downward on the exposed trail. The heat bore down without relief. His breathing became labored and he began sweating profusely despite growing dehydration. Nausea set in. The combination of existing heat exhaustion, continued exertion, and the stress and pain of the snake bite further compromised his condition. Later medical review noted significant cardiovascular strain in the setting of extreme heat and dehydration. Over the next several hours, his condition continued to deteriorate. Dizziness made it difficult to maintain balance on the steep trail. His pulse became rapid, and his skin took on a grayish pallor. He sat down on a rock beside the trail, but by then the cumulative effects of severe heat stroke and cardiovascular strain had pushed him past the point of recovery. Other hikers found him semi-conscious and immediately called for emergency assistance. Rangers were dispatched, but the remote location meant a significant response time. Medical findings later confirmed dangerously elevated core temperature and cardiovascular collapse. By the time help arrived several hours later, Ruddock had lost consciousness. Despite emergency treatment and cooling measures, he was later pronounced dead. Medical examiners determined the cause of death was heat stroke with cardiovascular collapse, complicated by severe dehydration, continued exertion, and the physical stress of a rattlesnake envenomation. It was September 9th, 2017. Below Cedar Ridge, the South Kaibab Trail followed an exposed ridgeline of fractured rock. The morning was briefly cool and clear before heat began to build, and posted warnings cautioned hikers against leaving the marked trail due to unstable terrain and steep drop-offs. Torin Blagg, 34 years old, worked as a freelance photographer specializing in landscape images. He was hiking alone that morning, carrying professional camera equipment and seeking unique angles for his portfolio. Torin had a habit of stepping off established trails to capture shots that others missed, often ignoring safety barriers and warning signs. He believed that the best photographs required taking calculated risks, and he had done similar off-trail photography in other locations without incident. The fractured red sandstone ledge he approached extended roughly 8 feet from the ridgeline. Visible stress fractures ran through the rock, creating dark lines that indicated structural weakness. The slab was approximately 3 feet wide and angled slightly downward toward the canyon. Other hikers had noticed the cracks and stayed on the designated trail, but Torin saw an opportunity for a dramatic perspective shot. He stepped onto the outer edge of the slab, testing it briefly with one foot before committing his full weight. The rock felt solid initially, and he moved further out to frame his shot. He positioned himself near the edge and leaned outward to capture the canyon vista below. His camera was raised, and he was adjusting settings when he shifted his weight to get a better angle. The slab detached suddenly from the ridgeline. There was a sharp cracking sound as the sandstone separated along existing fracture lines. Torin fell with the rock, dropping a significant distance toward the lower slopes below the trail. Evidence later found along the cliff face indicated that he struck multiple ledges and outcroppings during the fall. His body was later located on a broad rock shelf below the trail. Later examination determined that the fall caused massive thoracic and pelvic deceleration injuries. His camera equipment was scattered across the ledge, with pieces of broken gear marking the impact zone. There were no signs of movement when rescuers later reached the location. Other hikers on the trail above heard the sound of falling rock and looked down to see debris scattered on the ledge below. They could make out a motionless figure among the rocks and immediately called for emergency assistance. Rangers were notified and began organizing a technical rescue operation. The recovery required specialized equipment and trained personnel capable of rappelling to the ledge. Rangers reached the scene several hours later and confirmed that Torin had died on impact. His camera was found nearby, damaged but with the memory card partially intact. The last usable images on the memory card showed the canyon view he had been attempting to photograph. The official investigation determined that the cause of death was fatal trauma resulting from a fall due to rockfall. The sandstone ledge had separated along natural fracture lines that were visible before the incident. No equipment failure or external factors contributed to the accident. The area was temporarily closed while geologists assessed the stability of the surrounding rock formations. Additional warning signs were installed near the location, and the trail was reopened after a safety review. Torin's photography equipment was recovered and returned to his family, along with his personal effects. It was March 18, 2018. The Red Wall limestone formation stretched across the canyon in massive horizontal bands, carved by millions of years of erosion into complex cave systems and narrow fissures. The rock was solid but fractured, creating passages that ranged from wide chambers to slots barely wide enough for a person. The area was remote and largely unexplored, with no established trails or safety infrastructure. Vela Trone, 27 years old, was a graduate student studying geological formations. She specialized in limestone cave structures and had experience with underground research, though most of her previous work had been in mapped systems. She was conducting solo fieldwork that day, examining an undocumented fissure she had noticed outside her approved study area. Vela was methodical in her academic work, but had a tendency to push boundaries when she encountered interesting geological features. She had not established a surface check-in protocol with anyone, having deviated from standard safety requirements for solo cave research. Her research focused on measuring and documenting previously unknown passages, and she carried basic measurement tools, but no specialized cave rescue equipment. She had left her backpack at the entrance to travel lighter, taking only a headlamp with limited battery life. She had no rope and no spotter to assist if something went wrong. The fissure she entered measured approximately 18 inches at its widest point and sloped downward at a steep angle. The passage appeared to continue deeper into the rock formation, which made it scientifically interesting but also dangerous for solo exploration. The walls were abrasive limestone, worn by water flow but studded with chert and sharp protrusions that offered few usable handholds. The temperature inside the fissure remained near 50 degrees, adding constant cold stress during the entrapment. Vela entered the fissure head first, which allowed her to see ahead and take measurements as she progressed. The downward slope meant that gravity assisted her movement deeper into the passage, but it also made retreat more difficult. As she moved further in, the fissure gradually narrowed. What had started as a manageable squeeze became increasingly restrictive. The passage constricted around her chest and shoulders. Her arms became pinned at her sides, and the walls pressed against her ribcage from both directions. The downward angle meant that her body weight continued to pull her deeper into the narrowing space. She could not push backward against the unyielding walls, and there was no room to maneuver her arms. The compression around her chest severely restricted her ability to expand her lungs. The position left little room for normal breathing. The position prevented normal respiratory function, and the physical stress of being trapped increased her oxygen demand. The position made sustained breathing increasingly difficult as her chest remained compressed. Based on her position and the lack of available space for chest expansion, investigators later determined that she would have lost consciousness. Evidence at the scene indicated that gravity caused her body to settle deeper into the fissure, further restricting movement. Death was later attributed to positional compression that prevented normal breathing. Multiple days passed before she was reported missing by her academic advisor. A search was organized when she failed to return from her fieldwork. Rangers and a specialized cave rescue team trained for the canyon's limestone systems systematically checked known cave passages in the area where her vehicle was found. Her backpack was discovered at the entrance to the undocumented fissure, which led searchers to the location. Technical extraction required careful widening of the passage using hand tools and specialized cave recovery techniques to avoid collapse. The operation took several hours and required specialized equipment. The official cause of death was determined to be compressive asphyxiation, resulting from entrapment in a narrow cave passage. The investigation found no equipment failure or external factors. The fissure was documented and mapped as part of the recovery operation. It was August 6, 2017. Along the south rim, an exposed overlook near a rim trail junction lay beneath towering thunderheads that had been building throughout the afternoon. A desert monsoon storm was moving rapidly across the canyon, bringing frequent lightning and rolling thunder that echoed off the canyon walls. Rain had not yet reached the overlook, leaving the rock surfaces dry and offering no natural shelter as electrical activity intensified. Nolan Freer, 33, worked as an architectural modeler and was visiting the canyon with two friends. Accustomed to mountain weather in his home region, he had limited experience with the speed and volatility of desert monsoon storms. Methodical in his professional life, Nolan often became absorbed in creative moments, sometimes at the expense of situational awareness. He carried a metal-framed camera tripod and had stopped near the rim to film the advancing storm clouds. As the storm cell closed in, lightning strikes flashed across the canyon, followed by thunder that grew steadily louder. The air carried a sharp, metallic scent, and the intervals between thunderclaps shortened rapidly. His friends recognized the danger and urged him to move away from the exposed edge toward a nearby structure. Despite the warnings, Nolan remained focused on filming. He positioned himself on bare rock near the rim and extended the metal tripod to stabilize his camera. The tripod legs rested directly on the limestone surface, placing both Nolan and the equipment in contact with the exposed ground. Lightning was now striking nearby, with flashes occurring within several dozen feet of the overlook. A cloud-to-ground lightning strike hit the rim area close to where Nolan stood, releasing a powerful electrical discharge into the ground. The resulting ground current spread outward across the rock surface. Nolan, standing near the strike point and in contact with metal equipment, was caught within the electrical field. The tripod did not attract the lightning, but its presence likely intensified the electrical pathway once the ground current reached his position. The electrical surge passed through his hands and arms and into his torso, disrupting his heart's rhythm almost instantly. Witnesses saw his body stiffen before collapsing onto the rock. His clothing showed small, localized burn marks consistent with electrical entry and exit points. The tripod exhibited scorch marks and heat discoloration along its metal joints. Cardiac arrest occurred immediately, accompanied by respiratory failure. There was no purposeful movement after he collapsed, and the sound of thunder continued to roll overhead as the storm pressed on. After a brief lull in activity, his friends cautiously approached. Nolan was unresponsive and not breathing, and no pulse could be detected. Emergency services were contacted immediately, with dispatchers instructing them to keep distance until conditions improved. Rangers arrived approximately 20 minutes later and confirmed that Nolan had died at the scene. They documented the overlook, the damaged equipment, and surrounding conditions before securing the area. The tripod showed pitting and burn patterns consistent with nearby lightning exposure rather than a direct strike. The official cause of death was listed as fatal lightning injury, resulting in immediate cardiac arrest. Investigators concluded that Nolan had been struck by ground current from a nearby lightning strike, and that metal equipment likely increased the severity of exposure. Weather Service data confirmed significant lightning activity at the time. The overlook was temporarily closed until the storm passed and reopened later that evening. The incident was added to park lightning statistics, and later referenced in safety briefings, reinforcing warnings about exposed rim areas and the dangers of remaining outdoors during active thunderstorms. Thanks for watching. Want to see more? Click on your screen now.